and kind of blowing my mind and messing me up for the day. Can we talk a little bit about foodie culture and the definition of a foodie and what that might mean as a person of color who calls it, I guess, call myself a foodie, a soul foodie in particular? You talk a little bit about that, Nikki? Or any of you, all of you?
I can talk about that. I was at the Rock Eat Up yesterday with some of these folks, and my husband and I were so excited. We said we want to be the first one to host an Eat Up in Oakland. And if any of you are friends with me on Facebook, I see John Brower over there. He knows I have a bar. I literally have a bar in my backyard. I love to mix cocktails, make dinners. I love to eat out. Like, I really think of myself as a real foodie.
Why do we have this panel?
We will have this panel in my house. So I love food in so many different ways. I love to eat out. I also happen to be someone who's from a Filipino immigrant family. My family really struggled. I've worked in the social justice movement for a while, and you know, I'm not your average person out there, and I think what I would add to this story, like, yes, here in Alameda County, 8% of the workers are food preparation and service workers. Many of them are making just slightly above our minimum wage, and for me, I think one of the things that's really exciting is that this is also the home, just across the street, is our Unite Here, our union that represents the food service and hospitality workers, and Leon is back there, who's one of the organizers. And you know, there is a lot we can do as consumers, and ROC and CPA and others know there's also a lot that workers can do when they start to organize. And so I think one of the things that's really beautiful about this is there's an opportunity for consumers, for workers, even restaurant owners to organize together. And Unite is at the airport organizing fast food workers at the airport. And there's a lot that we can do, not just when we're dining, but also when we're at the airport grabbing a coffee or grabbing a quick meal to support workers who are actually standing up for themselves and making sure that they can support their families. Because on $10 an hour, which is what over 40,000 workers who work in food service make here in Alameda County, that's a poverty wage for a family. But workers can organize and have a union and fight for better wages and conditions.
Thank you. Sakib, do you want to talk about foodie definition?
Right. So my name is Sakib. I'm one of the founders of the People's Kitchen, which is, there's a couple People's Kitchen people here, and folks have been to those dinners. So real quick, like People's Kitchen is a sliding scale community restaurant food project that's all about movement building and creating like spaces of encounter around food and around the table. And we're using like local organic food. It has like all the markings and makings of this foodie event. And true, we get a lot of foodies at our dinners.
It is a foodie event.
Is it?
Uh-huh.
So this is what I struggle with, right? Like what does it mean to be a foodie, and what does it mean to be a person of color and a foodie? So when I think of foodie, much like the term hipster, it's got this terrible connotation, right? And it's a terrible thing. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. No, but what I think of a foodie in the worst way is this like celebration of hyper consumption, right? Like this idea that I'm gonna eat the best that I can eat and tell everyone about how good I have it. I'm gonna take pictures. I'm gonna tweet about it. Like, check out this delicious steak that I had, or these greens are so local. But it's completely, right? Like, I'm eating at such and such restaurant. Look, I'm at the chef.
Right.
Selfie.
I knew the name of the chicken, the whole nine.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not talking about Shara's Twitter feed, by the way. But what I am talking about is this moment, right? Like, so many of us as people of color, as communities in struggle, who can't afford the lifestyles that we're celebrating, and who don't live in a food system that can support this, like, celebrity status that we give our food, we need to have alternative ways of communicating, right? And we need to expand what the definition is of someone who likes to eat. Yeah. And it's true, we should celebrate our moments, like Saru was saying, so many of our important moments in our life are around food. There needs to be a broader definition to it that incorporates justice. So I don't have that term, like could be food justice-y, that sounds awkward. But something that is, that can speak to our love of coming together around the table and our love for justice and our demand of of having it both ways, right? This is Oakland. There's so much, polyamorous relationships going on, and our definitions of justice and our relationships to food need to be,
hey, let's just go deep.
Yeah, go deep.
That's why it's called deep dish.
Yeah. But I'll end it with poly and food.
That's okay.
You can keep that mic to yourself. Oh my God.
I had smart things to say, and then I listened to Saru talk, and then my brain just melted.
I think that's part of the idea. Hold on to that. I mean, let's talk about the role of culture in developing sustainable food systems and how that shows up, how we even experience food based on whatever culture we want to talk about. We can talk about queer culture, we can talk about race, gender, class, parents, whatever. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay.
Okay.
So People's Kitchen at its heart is this project around like deconstructing culture and food, right? We're looking at how our recipes tell the stories of who we are. Just like Saru said about, so much of our stories and our important life moments are in our experiences of food and experiences of eating together. People's Kitchen believes that our history as a people are written in our recipes, right? Our recipes travel with us. Our recipes experience the same traumas that we as a community, as a people experience. And they reflect our histories of resistance, resilience, migration, displacement, enslavement, everything travels in our foods. And when recipes pass down from generation to generation or recreated in a new land, you're recreating all these structures and telling that same story. So every time we sit down at People's Kitchen, those are the stories we're trying to bring to the table. We're using these recipes as that tool of storytelling and as that tool of kind of deconstructing culture and what it means to us and how we interpret it in the modern day or interpret it as we sit down together. But also, we're placing a heavy importance in understanding the role of culture in our food and celebrating that as a tool of decolonization. Right, to remove ourselves from a colonial food system. Yeah. So the conversation is broader than just, are my greens local, and where does chicken come from, and what's the chicken's name, but more so around, how are my people reflected in this, on this table, and how are the histories of my people upheld and celebrated, not only in the labor politics of the restaurant, or where the food comes from, but also what are the foods that are being served and shared.
I mean, when we talk about access to it, we talk about the transportation, not separating the conversations around immigration, migration, and transportation to the conversations around food justice and foodie culture. Right. Because as you and I were speaking earlier, if my cultural food is to have coconut water every day, to have coconut, I can't get a local coconut here. I cannot do that. So what is the conversation on, it was locally sourced, and I knew the person who climbed the tree and got the coconut. It doesn't matter. It flew here. It has a huge carbon footprint. That doesn't matter.
And that's one of the main, I think, failures of the food movement, right? Of the mainstream food movement, and the mainstream food justice movement, or foodie culture in general. It doesn't account for the lived experiences and the migration, the histories of diverse communities, right? Like this whole idea of California cuisine, and an example would be figs. Like, oh, I eat local, I'm eating California cuisine, I'm eating figs, which aren't local to here.
No, they're not. Not indigenous to here at all.
Right, so if you are a person of color, a foodie of color, perhaps, and you're trying to eat local, you're going to be ostracized by the food movement if you're eating the foods of your communities and your people. And now, what does that say about the broader food movement that doesn't create space for these diverse lived experiences?
Sorry, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, when you ask about culture, to me, I go in a different direction, which is how can we use culture to reach the broadest possible audience in America? Because to me, ultimately, we have to win. We have to change things. It's not enough for us to keep talking, and it's certainly not enough for us to keep talking to each other, because on the left, in progressive circles, we just talk to ourselves a lot. We talk to ourselves a lot, and so, our thinking in writing a book, getting Danny Glover to do a movie, these things were about reaching a much, much wider audience because we have to. Because if we're going to win something in Congress, or even if we're going to win something in Sacramento, we have to think much broader than we've been thinking. And so, I feel very positive about that. So I was on Real Time with Bill Maher a few weeks ago on HBO, and it was a very interesting experience because Bill Maher is kind of a character, as you know, a bit of a sexist, and at the end of the show, you know, it was an experience. But I have to say something that happened that most people didn't know. So there was this exchange with me and Bill Maher and I on the show, where I came in the middle and he interviewed me about the book, and then he wanted to move on to Jay-Z and Beyonce going to Cuba. And I said, well, 1 in 3 Americans lives and works in poverty, but thank God we're talking about something really important like Jay-Z and Beyonce going to Cuba.
Oh, great.
And he was really pissed. You could see it, he was kind of livid. He wouldn't look at me for the rest of the show. But the studio audience broke out in cheers. And the minute that I stepped off the studio platform, like 4 or 5 crew members rushed me, brought me the book, and said, we all work in this industry or worked in this industry, can you sign our book? And then after the show, I literally got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails, and I'm not sharing this with you to say, you know, I got hundreds of emails. This is our email. These are our emails. They were emails saying there are more people out there that support you than you think. Emails from retired Navy officers and Hollywood producers and Washington lobbyists saying, we all agree with you and there's a voice that you bring to mainstream media that we're not hearing. And many which said, when you said that about Jay-Z and Beyonce, we all stood up in our living room and cheered. Yes. You know, and so to me, what that meant, what that made me feel, was that we're missing something. We keep talking to each other, but there's a world of people out there that if we could find the right words, the right messages, the right avenues to talk to them, they would agree with us. They agree with us that things need to change, and it's only by talking to them that ultimately we're going to win. So to me, culture has to be about not talking to ourselves. That's important because we need to feel our power, but it also has to be about reaching masses of people that don't look anything like us, that live in Peoria. I'm sorry to keep bringing up Peoria, but Peoria and Kansas, these places that we think are not like Oakland, but there are people like us there.
What's your next question?
She's like, let's just move on. I want to go back to the idea of slavery, actually, because we live and work and are in this culture that really has disconnected us, not only from the dirt, you know, from the land, because the food justice work that we hear often in the Bay Area, in the East Bay, particularly in Oakland, is around food justice work from the land workers and from the people who are growing the food, and not so much of a conversation that I've been a part of from the people who are serving the food. But there's this idea that we're disconnected from growing it, we're disconnected from our history. And so we see slavery as something of the past. It's history, and it's not history. And so when you brought up earlier this idea that this is slavery, and we haven't talked really about the effects of colonialism, how that has shown up, you know, in utero, psychologically, spiritually, culturally. What are some of the, I'd say, impacts of colonialism and slavery, the slave mentality that we continue to perpetuate in this food culture, in the sectors? Who wants to take that? Say something.
So this is a deep dish, huh? No, I know.
Deep dish.
Deep dish.
Deep dish. Go in.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the things I was reflecting on, so Saru gave us some examples of, you know, people working the whole day and having to give that money back. I mean, I think we have many situations here where there's this idea of wage theft. I used to work with garment workers, and I know it happens even today with a lot of other workers where you can work for a day, sometimes a week, sometimes even months, and your employer has such a stranglehold on you that you know you have nothing if you leave that job, that you'll get cheated out of your wages. And you know, you have to find a situation where you can band together with other workers, with advocates, to get those wages back. And you know, that does happen. And then also, you know, just thinking about workers here who serve our food, they're making $8 or $10 an hour. They can't buy that meal that we might be eating. You know, some of the restaurants, even here, that are more affordable in this neighborhood of Oakland, they cannot actually sit down and eat at the restaurant they might be serving because of their wages. And I think, you know, we have a situation where we're not creating good jobs. You know, here in Oakland, I think one of the biggest problems we have is a lack of access to good jobs. You know, my organization, eBase, does some research and policy and advocates for solutions, and we have 35%, 45% unemployment in West and East Oakland, and that's because of a lot of reasons, but it's really because of the systemic problem that our city is not providing good jobs and creating pathways through a range of systems, including education, to make sure our kids can grow up and have a dream and have access to good jobs. And I think that's part of what's perpetuated by the cycle of racism that has existed in this country.
All right. So I mean, it's no secret, right? We live in a colonial food system. We live in a broken food system where struggles for food justice are literally like fought over pennies, right? If you know, familiar with the Coalition for Immocklee Workers coming out of Immocklee, Florida, they're fighting for 1 penny more per basket of tomatoes, and that's stunning. And if you couple that with like stories from farm workers from across the country of people literally being chained to their farm equipment to keep them from escaping at night, right? People being locked in shipping containers, or if you know like the stories that came out about Charles Shaw Vineyards and the labor practices of Trader Joe's, right? Like these are stories that follow, but these are stories that also don't show up in our story, in our, you know, our media. Thank you. So no secret, we live in a very colonial food system that's based in slavery, and it's still to this day, like Saru demonstrated and talked about. Another part of it is that the impacts of colonialism are not only showing up as trauma in our food that comes to our table, but also have long histories of trauma, where even the way that we think about food and the way that our food is interpreted by the general public is really rooted in colonialism or Orientalism. I'll use the example of curry and curry powders is something that is completely fabricated by colonialism. It doesn't exist in South Asian kitchens. It's this thing that the British created to sell back to their kingdom to the other British people. Like, hey, colonialism's great because you get to eat this delicious thing, and we brought it from exotic India, and we just created this general spice blend that's terrible and tastes disgusting, and it's bland, and it has nothing to do with anything other than it's something that the British created. It's this whole food culture that they created to sell the idea of imperialism and colonialism to their subjects. So that image then is how a broad group of people in the West now experience Indian food, right? It's not about the regional histories, it's not about even the migration patterns of South Asian communities, or it's not South Indian food, North Indian food, West Indian food, whatever, it's curry. I went out for a curry. It's a common conversation people have in the UK, it's a common conversation people have in the US, right? Yeah. And who goes out? I use the term curry because I don't have like another word that's readily accessible to other people to understand what South Asian food is like. So what happens is colonialism is not only putting us in systems of trauma and experiencing trauma through our food and re-experiencing when we eat it, but also it's traumatizing the way that we interpret and experience each other's cultures, the way that we come together is heavily rooted and heavily influenced by colonialism. And that's why at People's Kitchen we try to deconstruct those images of our cultures and the stories around it.
I'll just say one quick thing because I'd love to hear from people, which is the other part of slavery and colonialism that we often don't think about is it wasn't just about the entrapment and confinement of people in working conditions. It was also about among the powers that be, a collusion among property and the decision makers, right? That's really what it was about ultimately, and that does exist now. So the fact that the National Restaurant Association makes these behind closed door deals with our legislators means not only that this is definitely not a democracy because they're making those decisions, not us. You know, raising the minimum wage polls 71% popular among Republicans and Democrats alike, according to Gallup, which means who is Congress listening to? Not their Republican constituents, certainly not their Democratic constituents. They're listening exclusively to the NRA. So
the NRA?
Both NRAs. Both NRAs. Both NRAs. Right? Yeah. But the good news is, you know, Gandhi, another resistor against imperialism and colonialism, said first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, then you win. And thankfully we're at the fight stage, because the NRA is so threatened by us at this point that they've actually created a fully staffed organization called Rock Exposed that has 2 full-time staff.
Wow.
They've taken out
okay.
they've taken out 2 full-page ads in USA Today. They got Darrell Issa, congressman from Orange County, to issue a congressional probe into us. We were so flattered by that. Most recently, they put out a report about how we're engaged in illegal lobbying activities. It was covered in the Washington Examiner and all these places. So we feel like we've arrived, because, you know, year after year, we'd go protest and do flash mobs on their annual lobbying day, when they would bring hundreds of lobbyists from McDonald's and Olive Garden Red Lobster to descend on Capitol Hill. This year, we announced the formation of our alternative restaurant association with employers around the country, and they showed up and protested us, and it was the most wonderful moment ever. Signs that said, "Sequester Rock." I was so excited. So we're at the stage where they're fighting us, which means that we are going to win.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Congratulations
Thank
on
you.
being a protester. You know, as we say, we're arrested. And we also say haters fall back. You know, you're not doing it right if you don't have hate. Way back. Fall way back. Okay? So